Chapter 9. I like big books and I cannot lie. It was the 2004 holiday season, and a college student, let's call him Bob, was home in Sacramento. One night, out on the town, hit me another young man, Slick Daddy G, but nicknamed him Slick Daddy G, who was 26, was a larger-than-life personality type, but recall he had perfectly highland blonde hair, short and yellow, perfect with teeth, perfect bronzed skin. He also had his own limo driver, seemingly endless supply of the money. But joined Slick Daddy G for a night on the club hopping pickup and pretty girls and drinking Dom Perignon. The crew ended up in the penthouse apartment. It was just called the P, where an insane party was taking place. A DJ and more girls, both at drugs than you can imagine, says Bob. It was one of the craziest experiences of my life to this point. The next morning, Bob asked, Slick Daddy G, what the hell do you? Ameriquest came the reply. I'm the mortgage business. Incredibly, the subprime mortgage business, which had been left for dead, had Conroy became bigger than ever. Never mind that most of the mortgage originator during the first subprime bubble, subprime ones, let's call it, and they had one boss, and they're giving mortgage to shaky borrowers and had led and the rather surprising rise in the foreclosures, and then never mind that the subprime financial model had been very nearly described subprime. One, says John Rusner, was the pretty dish. The second subprime bubble was a well-known thing ever seen in American business. During subprime 2, kids just out of school, sometimes high school, become loss officers and they're pulling down in 30 or 40 months. Slick Daddy G told Bob in the one especially good month to the hit to home. In some place like Ameriquest's Sacramento office, where Bob had taken a job in 2005, drug use was an open secret. Former loan officers I especially cook and meat, so that and the loan officers could sell 14 hours a day and the money powering. It wasn't just Ameriquest. Either in 1906 and Washington Mutual retired for the top performing in Maui, employees formed a rap skit called I Like Big Books to the tune and the baby got back to the great rap. I like big books and I cannot lie. Your mortgage brother can't deny that when the dog rolls in life, you're printing your own cash and you gotta make a splash. You just spend like it never ends. You just gotta have to that big new bands. Was triggered to Prime 2 besides some very short memories was a long wristband decision to push interest rates down to near historical lows during the first years and the new interest to keep the economy from faltering. Low interest rate draws down mortgage rates, making home purchase more attractive while driving up investor demand for yield, and despite the repound lending abuse the characteristics from Prime 1. The government continued to smile at the subprime phenomenon because it's supposed to benefit in helping more American buy home. Naturally, wristbands held this view, where once more marginal applicants would simply have been denied credit. Lenders are now able to quite efficiently judge the risks posed by individual applicants and to price the risks accordingly, he said in April. But there was another factor as well, piece by piece. Over the course of the nearly 2 decades, high money machine had been assembled and depend on the subprime mortgage is a raw material. Wall Street needed subprime mortgage, needed good package in the security bonds and the investor around to the world. Warren the Wall Street mortgage product because they offer high yields in the low yield environment. Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, which has stayed away from subprime one, moved heavily into the business by 2005. So the security industry delivered $1 billion in revenue from the underwriting funds backed in mortgage and real estate assets. Speed Carlton analysts data at the longer to account for a staggering 25% in the bond underwriting revenue. Mortgage originators took the super risk mortgage and the Wall Street trade no matter what. The fraud that took place during the subprime 1 and the in comparison to what happened during the subprime 2. Every borrower who qualified for a traditional mortgage might be pushed toward a high fee, high interest rate subprime product and non-traditional mortgage. Not did every prime borrower need to push it and subprime to move to the bubble territory. More and more people want to so-called affordability products. Lot with low teaser rate they would quickly reset a new higher rate, for instance, or even negative amortization loans. The actual purchase of the new homes was only part of what drove this new bubble. A fraud had begun to suspect millions of Americans were using subprime mortgage to front to the rise in the value of the homes they already owned. A big chunk in the Ameriquet's business, for instance, was something called cash-out refinancing, meaning that the borrower refinanced the mortgage based on the increased value of the home and they pull it out to the state's cash for spending. By February 2004, 42 tweets and the loans made by New Century, another huge subprime lender, were cash-out refis. More than half the subprime origination and the more than 1/3 of all Alt-A loans were used for refinancings. And of course, housing prices themselves were going to talk to the world, which was enabled to excavate everything else since 1914 years, according to the data compiled by the FSB called Schiller Home Price Index. The average home increased in value by 0.7% a year, but between 2001 and 2006, 14 of the 20 largest metropolitan areas in the country saw home values rise by more than 10% a year. Like Phoenix and Las Vegas increased by inflation at just 18%. The radian home price income, which had over between 2 and 4 signs to the Great Depression. During subprime 1, the new subprime companies had been marginal players in the enormous houses industry. In subprime 2, the subprime company dominated to the industry. Washington Mutual turned itself into the biggest thrift in the country by moving aggressively into the richest firm on the subprime lending. In April 1996, Roland Arnold moved out of the house that he shared with his wife and 37 years, Miriam Solly Arnold. During their divorce proceedings, he told her that because things were not going too well with his business, her financial future would be uncertain unless she settled quickly. She later alleged in the court filing. In the divorce, which was finally said in April 1998, she got $11 million tax-free and their homes in Los Angeles, in Palm Springs, Arnold also paid her legal fees. He in turn had full control of brand new companies Ameriquest Capital Corporation. As it turns out, Arnold's financial future was spectacular. In the spring of the 1987, before the divorce was concluded, Arnold had spun the division on Long Beach and initial public offering. Arnold's name was mentioned only once on the offering documents, and the owner and the percent of the parent company. His company sold or shared the outside investor, reaping and a little over in the process. A few years later, the new publicity hall Long Beach was sold to Washington Mutual, marking the thrift entry into subprime lending. By then, however, Arnold was already in the process of creating a new subprime empire. ACC became a holding company for more than a dozen entities, including Ameriquest and Town and the Country, two retail subprime lenders with their own sales boards, an agent which saw launched through independent brokers. According to the American Banker from 2001 to 2004, ACC's loan volume grew more to the 12-fold, to putting an ACC atop to the list of prime lenders that year. In some ways, Arnold followed his old playbook and made priced loans to people who will eventually have trouble paying them back, and he sold to the loans on the Wall Street, but he didn't at a much bigger scale than Long Beach. The company's slogan was, "What else?" the proud sponsor of the American dream. Executives were extremely well paid. Wei Li, who had worked for Arnold since in 1919, spent 1 year as an Ameriquest CEO before quitting in the spring of 1905. He later said in this position that in 1904 and 1905 he had received yearly bonus on around $5 million on top of his hourly in salary. His severance agreement has really extraordinary in return for working a maximum 25 hours every 3 months and agreeing to neither compete with another disparage. He spent 1 year at Ameriquest CEO before quitting in the spring of 1905. As for loan officers, they got a small base salary, but most of their money in commission, typically 50% on the revenue they generate and the perks, and it was fabulous. Every year, Ameriquest hosts an event called the Big Spin in Las Vegas. For hundreds of top producers in 2004, Jim Belushi was the ounce and the rock dog band Airline playing in 2005. Already one gun, the company also gave its top 300 loan officers all expenses paid trip to Hawaii in 2005. The amount of the money the company had to throw around was staggering, says a former corporate employee. This guy said who were 25 years and maybe had a couple years at college were making incredible money and driving Porsches. I feel like something was wrong. When they weren't partying, the young loan and the officers in Ameriquest were under enormous pressure to most love. It was a shop, and the whip was always buying crack for more, says Mark Burchill, describing the Ameriquest office in Minnesota where he worked from 1 year. 2 other former loan officers interviewed with separately said the same description. Tim Glengarry Glenn Rose. Loan officers were often required to make a certain number of pounds calls each day, 150, says Bob, but there were power hours for calling managers were brutal to those who were wearing closing lungs, recalls another former employee, first took anyone car's wash guy let alone car salesman. Lexbo execute Sander, hire young desperate people to keep costs down, took former loans officer. The real reason was the inexperience. Loans officers were less likely to realize that they were screwing people over, as well as the temporary and the ranches were run a little like at the houses. Were no longer rewarded for taking additional fees in an implement to the new software designed to prevent fraud, but the relentless pressure for non-volume never changed, and the branches there always seemed to be ways of getting around to the new policies. It's a tour to the suggest to the near 2003 change, so after the province says anyone long time critic. Ameriquet's core product was something called in 228 loan, meaning in had a low fixed rate for 2 years, and the compared to higher adjustable rate for a remaining 80 years. What I made to 28 years, one particularly pernicious if option came with a 3 year prepayment penalty. They mean that borrower either had to refinance a 2 and paid a hefty fee, or paid the higher rate for a year before refinancing without having to pay a penalty. Then there were the points and fees Ameriquest charged in the theory borrowers put up from point to reduce the interest rate on their loan, and the theory racks basic pricing or charging consumer based on the rights that represent meant that the rights borrower should pay more in debt. That's the essential justification for some lending. A spreadsheet of the loans Ameriquest made in the month of February 2005 offers a vivid illustration. One customer with a mid-grade credit score on a loan and paid the maximum in point and fees. The renew to Ameriquest was another customer with a loan paying so little in fees and points than the loan generated only for Ameriquest. Yet, the second customer was far less creditworthy than the first. Another example from the same spreadsheet. 2 borrowers were with the same credit score to the out to 88, 28 loans are rarely the same amount. One of them paid over 3% and the point to get 6.5% interest rate. Ameriquest also had special portfolio rotation branches whose job was to prevent Ameriquest borrowers from the refinancing with competitor. They would pay face to the big credit bureaus and get alerts whenever an Ameriquest customer requests a credit check. That was standard practice in the industry, according to the former loans officer. But they all sometimes did something for the later. Bob said that certain American employees who would hack into the system and print out a sheet with everything about borrower, the size of their loan, their social security number, birthday, and contact information. The loan officer it's a compare of the chapter 9. And what happened with the complaints about the practice launched into the public view? Once again, Arnold fell back on his old playbook. He explained whatever it took made them go away in late 1999. The Crossroads organization account picket on 20 Ameriquest offices, accusing on their deceptive lending tactics. Ameriquest respond by committing to fund in Akron originated 30-year fixed rate loans. Akron stopped picketing. Very few of the loans were ever made. In 2001, a group of Ameriquest borrowers filed a class action lawsuit against the company that first money in selling Ameriquest a rate to pay up to the 50 million in reimbursement, and 3 years later the state connects to charge Ameriquest with reluctant state regarding the financing. Connecticut announced on the second settlement over the same issue. Ameriquest blamed to the problem of the new employees who didn't know the rule. It paid $7.25 to move on. Roland was not cheapskate, says listening Robert Gasnasta. He spent money and took it would be helpful. As Ameriquest became to the country's dominant subprime lenders, Arnold himself became extraordinarily healthy in 2005. He made to the Forbes list of the richest people in America, with the new worth of $2 billion the following year. The magazine estimated his net worth is at $3 billion, ranking him 70 tiers on the list. By then, his second wife, Dar Arnold, owned a $30 million tenor crop compound in Los Angeles and a queer ranch in Spain snuggled between two ski resorts. To the former property had been owned by Sonny and Cher in the 1970s. The latter was the second most expensive home in the country according to the list compared in the 1940s by Forbes magazine in the Journal. And from his office in ACC Bland 12 stories headquarters in Orange County, the epicenter of the subprime industry, he never ever spoke about the practice to the permit to the branch office. Headquartered, in fact, actually the company were prime virtue rather ran the place to the outset with Elsley and Frau in Julie. For Eastern Ameriquest publicly commit to the set best practice, which included promise to the let 2 years pass before refinancing and any loans until the refrain from offering loans with balance payments and negative amortization. From offering loans with balance payments and negative amortization the following year, Ameriquest chairman Steve Proud testified before the Senate Banking Committee. Ameriquest had been invited to testify because many in Washington consider Ameriquest a modern subprime lender. Yet the evidence suggests that the best practices were mainly honored in the branch. One sample, after an exhaustive analysis on the public records, the Los Angeles Times determined that nearly 1 in the 9 Ameriquest mortgage were refinancing of existing Ameriquest loan less to the 24 months and precisely what the company had promised and they willing to do. The question of how much Arnold knew about his company's sordid lending practice is something we'll never know. Arnold died in 2008 after being diagnosed with esophageal cancer and without ever being pinned about why exactly his involvement was. Even so, to ACC, he was a mysterious figure. He tended to the flow about to the problem never got involved in the nitty-gritty and the business. Never ever did I ever see him pick up on loan field, say for the Cube. On the other hand, how could he not have known? The company was constantly paying to the accusation, investigation, and lawsuit charging and the fraud and deceptive practices. We were inundated with history about the conduct to the shared personnel. Everything from through use of fraud to the affiliation, say another former cubes. At best, Arnold seemed to have practiced a kind of willful ignorance. In January 23, and question about America's practice were heading up to the company hired mortgage, better named Ed Parker, to investigate fraud to the branch. At first, Parker says, he was hopeful he would be given to authority to do the job right. In his first investigation, he hoped to start a branch in Michigan. After looking at 2,500 to the loan file and discovering that the loan officers were all using the same view, a pressure to inflate to the value of the properties, the fraud wasn't subtle. There would even be notes in the file spelling to the value appraiser had been told to hit. But Parker says that another executive made comments that caused him to think they didn't really want him to be shown as silver. His son decided that. As he later put it, I was not brought in to do a job. I was brought into the private cover in Fresno. He discovered the branch employees were manipulating banks' statements to make it appear to the prospective borrower are more reserved than they think they were. Good and the page information from one borrower statement to another. Several of the implication employees had been promoted. The branch manager at other California branches. Parker discovered the state income letter were being manufactured and the means to present the age of the early borrowers. One loan application stated to the borrower was a 40-year-old. The consultant who earned it. In fact, the borrower was 74 in the Florida ranches, said Parker. There were just so many problems with the loans. He would record what the funds sent into management and then nothing would happen. He says he turned the information cut out on the decision making and eventually filed in July in lawsuit Parker for alleged employment and discrimination. What Arnold defender says, and what the defender of the subprime originator will say after the fact is that the true violence to the non-lender and the Main Street to the investment confirms on the Wall Street. Wall Street, after all, was but making the warehouse loans the way subprime companies depend on the buying after the mortgage and the securitization them. The Wall Street firms, in fact, were detecting what kind of mortgage they would buy and how to practice. Wall Street see the product guidelines. Say a former American security, I can say to the consumer, here's your rate. Wall Street figures and the investor are willing to pay. They design and they present it to you. If they say, don't put it on the my warehouse line, and means you can make the loan. This executives claim to the one to offer loans without prepayment penalties, but he couldn't because was Wall Street golden boy them. John Daurio, the executive who had worked for Arnold and Knox Beach and the way one of the several of the subprime company, recalls a meeting with some representatives and Bernstein. How can you increase your volume? The Bernstein banker asked, we say tongue in the check. Well, we can do a loan to value instant income loan for FICO score. Translate the main making loan with no down payment in income verification to borrower with very low credit score. Daurio continue. They say okay. We say no problem. Let's do this all day and with it in massive quantities. The only party that was letting of them, in fact, were the customer, and they respectfully so. Their 10 were so pernicious that they won a crushing hundreds or thousands of borrowers even before the bubble had ended in the fall. WAMU held a series of focus groups to figures on the outside more pay option arms. According to the summary of the focus group, very few people simply walk through to the door and ask for an option REMs. In fact, the summary continues where most borrowers say the pay auction were a moderately or very bad concept. They also say things like, It's really scary to me what's going to happen in 5 years. 5 years. And I have this feeling of impending doom. Most customers say that they feel good being able to pay a portion of the principal each month because they seem to be right thing to do. But customers will persuaded to take an auction every end with a racial pitch. Wamu, for instance, know that his salesperson told the borrower that price appreciation would likely overcome any negative amortization. They often come around, pay auctions, ARMs, and the awards were sold, not bought. Participants generally chose an auction ARM because it's very common to them. The WAMU summary said, a Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta study later correlated financial literacy to mortgage delinquencies, implying into the unsophisticated consumer were the ones most likely to fall more this kind of pitch. Later, after everything had come to an end, an American launch officer named Christopher Warren, who, like Bob, worked in Sacramento office, posts a rambling confession only about his year in the mortgage business of the 3 years AmeriQuest, where he said he started as a teenager he wrote, "Manager and handler talk me the ins and outs of mortgage fraud, drugs, sex, and money, and more money. My friend and manager handed a crystal methamphetamine to a loan officer in a bid to keep them up a world longer hours. At any given moment inside to the restroom, cocaine to the mat with pain snorted by my estimate, more than a third of the staff and more than half of the staff was manipulating documents to the can loans to the fund and more to the person made completely false statements. A typical welcome aboard gift was per Caesar by a wipe out. He left, he said, with the personal information of the America's customer to start a company called Whithill Financial. His new company had made fake credit score, paid stop and back statements in order to sell insecurity back in his loans. He could get away with it because Wall Street didn't care. After posting confession, were trying to flee to the country but was arrested in Canadian border with 1 million in Swiss bank certificates and stuff in the coward boys. The case was pending off in 2010. Is partly unfair to using Warren example a typical employee. Had AmeriQuest been an outlier, that would have been but it wasn't. This aggressive practice were copied by supreme competitors across to the country because they feel it. They didn't copy AmeriQuest. They lose the business to someone who had. I think AmeriQuest was the trendster side Brownshield. They speak with their name everywhere. The AmeriQuest was a problem for use because we're a large company as everyone was trying to compete with them, says an executive and another large lender. If we deny a loan, we try to ultimately did to the loan. On the last time it was AmeriQuest. Every time we reject a loan, the sale for World Cup, I say, well, AmeriQuest is doing this. I will say, just because Johnny jump on the rights doesn't mean you have to follow. But they all did jump on the rights, including eventually the biggest lender on the of them all, countrywide.